The winter anime season has finally begun, and there are a lot of new series making their debut this time around. In today's video, I'll be discussing some of the latest anime to premiere in the last couple of weeks. Due to time constraints, I'll only be giving my quick thoughts on each show. I hope to tackle more in upcoming videos, but for now I want to keep things as brief as possible. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. This first show I'm about to discuss comes from Studio Trigger and is an adaptation of a manga by Ryoko Kui. Delicious in Dungeon is a cooking fantasy series about a party that goes back into a dungeon in order to save their comrade who was eaten by a dragon on one of the lower floors. Laios and his party were nearly killed until his sister Fallon saved them using a teleporting spell. After a couple of their companions leave them, Laios and the remaining members of his party, Marcel and Chochuk, decide to return to the dungeon to rescue their comrade. However, since they're low on funds and have nothing to eat, they must now live off the monsters that reside there. This anime wasn't on my radar at all, but I'm glad I decided to give it a chance. I knew about this show ahead of time, but the premise didn't really catch my attention when watching the preview videos. The series premiere was an enjoyable introduction to its world and the main characters. As expected from a Studio Trigger production, the animation and artwork look good. Although the art style is a departure from some of their past work, I do like the character design so far. Apart from the visuals, the premiere did a good amount of world building regarding the dungeon itself and the different monsters that inhabit it. I'm impressed by the level of detail that the author has included regarding how certain monsters attack their prey and how to prepare them for a meal. I can tell a lot of thought went into coming up with all of that. What really made this first episode so enjoyable were the characters and the interactions between them as they killed different creatures and ate their very first monster meals thanks to the help of a dwarf named Senchi. As Laios begins preparing the food in the catacombs area, Senchi suddenly comes over to assist him by adding in ingredients and cutting up the monster meat. Watching this group enjoy their freshly cooked meals reminded me of a similar anime that aired this time last year called Campfire Cooking in Another World. I wasn't a fan of that series at all. I thought the dialogue could have been better, the animation was underwhelming considering who produced it, and most of all, the characters were bland and uninteresting. I was way more entertained by this first episode than I ever was watching that show, and that's partially because of how great the dialogue and humor is. There were some pretty funny moments throughout the episode, most of which involved Marcel, who is initially against the idea of eating monsters. Her reaction to Laios going into detail about the man-eating plants had me cracking up. Based on this episode, Delicious in the Dungeon seems like it could be a fun and relaxing series. I'd definitely recommend giving it a shot if you have a Netflix subscription. Next up is the fantasy comedy series 'Tis Time for Torture Princess. I decided I'd check this one out the moment I learned that Pine Jam was animating it, given that I've liked many of their shows in the past. This series is centered around a princess and her talking sword Excalibur, or X, who are imprisoned by demons collectively known as the Hell Horde. Each day, the group's Grand Inquisitor Tortura attempts to get her to leak the Royal Empire's secrets so that they can use it to crush the Imperial Army. Throughout the premiere, Tortura torments the princess by tempting her with delicious food that she really wants to eat. While I thought this was an okay premiere, I'm not completely sold on the premise just yet. If every episode plays out similar to this one, things could get stale very quickly. I assume there will be other methods the Hell Horde will use to entice the princess other than just putting tasty food in front of her. Hopefully there's enough variation and surprises in the plot to keep people engaged from week to week. The majority of this episode consisted of the princess overreacting to the food that Tortura would bring to her cell, which included a piece of toast, takoyaki, and a bowl of ramen. The humor and fun of this anime is supposed to come from the princess's over-the-top reactions as she tries to resist her desire to devour the appetizing meals presented to her. Unfortunately, the comedic moments didn't really work for me during this premiere. I don't think any of it was necessarily bad, but a lot of it just wasn't funny to me. I chuckled slightly on a couple occasions, one of which being the post-credit scene at the end that recounts what the princess was thinking when she took down the monster at the start of the episode. The other being that short moment where she's hopping around and chanting with X after she makes her own takoyaki. I believe this show could benefit greatly from a well-produced English dub. Those who are very sensitive to Japanese voices may find the protagonist grating after a while. Given the nature of this anime, I imagine that there will be plenty more frantic moments like the one in the beginning where the princess claimed to not be enticed by the piece of bread she was offered. Scenes such as this would probably work better if viewed in one's own native language, since it would be much easier to process everything. Plus, if the script is good, then the voice actors could make the sequence more entertaining. I truly think I would have enjoyed this episode a lot more if it were in English. That being said, I believe this series has the potential to be another great chill anime to watch if the comedy improves and things don't get too repetitive. It's already got a solid production, but the other aspects of the show could be better. The final show I wanted to discuss is Villainess Level 99, an isekai series based on a novel by Satoru Tanabata and produced by Jumando, the studio that produced last year's adaptation of I Shall Survive Using Potions. Just like with Delicious in Dungeon, I wasn't planning on checking this one out initially, but I decided to at least give the first episode a shot. This is another one of those otome isekai shows where the protagonist is reincarnated in the world of a game they've played before. I'll be honest, I was ready to write this one off as just another generic villainous anime when I saw the trailers prior to release, but after watching the premiere, I gotta admit I might have been wrong. For those that don't know, the basic premise of this show is that the main character was hit by a truck and reborn in the world of light magic and hero as the game's hidden last boss, Yumiella Darkness. Instead of following the predetermined script, which would end in her defeat at the hands of the heroine and her comrades, she resolves to live a peaceful life and spends her early years grinding a dungeon to increase her level. Once she starts attending the Royal Academy, Yumiella tries her best to avoid contact with the heroine Alicia Enliot and the three people that fight alongside her in the game, Edwin Valsheen, Oswald Grimsarde, and William Eris. Her plans to keep a low profile are ruined when her abnormally high level is revealed during the entrance ceremony. This was a pretty solid series premiere that took me by surprise with how it presented the beginning of the story. The first half of the episode is centered on Alicia and follows the events leading up to the entrance ceremony where she accidentally bumps into Yumiella. From there, the show introduces the main character and explains the circumstances of her current situation. The latter half of the premiere focuses on Yumiella, showing certain events from her perspective, as well as her training in a dungeon as a child. I really like the approach that the author and the studio took with regards to establishing the characters. Introducing the game world and the secondary cast before the protagonist is very different from the bog standard way I'm accustomed to seeing it handled. Everything was set up very effectively. Jumando's decision to include an opening sequence for Light and Hero was also a nice touch. Aside from the atypical way they presented things, just about everything else in the premiere was fairly average. At the very least, this episode got me interested in Yumiella's story. I can't give this one a glowing recommendation just yet, but it might be worth watching if you're into this type of anime. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. What did you think about these series premieres? What are some of the shows you're keeping up with this season? Let me know in the comment section below, and as always, thanks for watching.